Hello, and welcome to this lecture entitled, What Do Archivists Do and What is an Archives? We'll look at these topics. First, we'll define the word archives, then we'll describe the archival mission. We will then determine the differences between archives, museums, and libraries. And finally, we'll distinguish between professional practice and craft practice. There are three definitions of the term archives. And to understand them, you have to understand the context in which they're spoken. The first definition is that an archives is a body of records or manuscripts. Gregory Hunter puts too fine a point on it when he distinguishes between archives on one hand and manuscripts on the other, at least for our purposes. Whether it's organizational or personal, the terms archives and archivist apply. Most archivists working outside of a single entity that is a proprietary repository deal with both organizational and personal archives. Later on, however, there are reasons to draw distinctions between organizational records and personal papers, but that's when we get to the nitty-gritty of working with them, and that's not in this course. The second definition of the word archives is that it is the repository in which the records reside. Whether the repository is a drawer in a cabinet or a box kept in the house, or it's a dedicated building like the National Archives, we apply the word archives to the place that holds the non-current records. The third definition is that the archives is the agency that operates and manages the repository or the body of records. The agency is the bureau, crew, or individual responsible for maintaining the repository and the materials therein. In a bit of gallows humor, archivists call the staff member of a single-person repository a lone arranger. Let's talk now about the archival mission. Gregory Hunter writes that the archival mission is to identify, preserve, and make available records of enduring value. O'Toole wrote in the 1990s that the archival mission was to acquire, organize, and make available archival records. These are similar, but O'Toole's conception focuses on the records as records rather than the information that documents actions. And O'Toole articulates a craft orientation. Hunter reflects a more modern conception of the role of the archivist, as well as the impact of digital records and some changes in archival theory that emphasize the actions that produce the records rather than the records themselves as artifacts. Each of these components, I guess you'd call them, of the mission have actions that implement them. When we identify records, we first survey, then select, then acquire, then accession them. When we preserve records, we begin with accessioning, then we preserve them through an array of mechanisms. Then we process these to gain intellectual control over them. Finally, we make records available by arranging and describing them, by providing access and reference to them, and by conducting outreach and promotion of the records. Again, all of these are records of enduring value. We go full circle with reselecting records, as you see in Hunter, because, as he writes, neither the records nor the value of the records is permanent. Appraisal, the evaluation of value of archival materials, permeates everything an archivist does and everything that an archives is. We'll look at these goals and tasks of archivists later in another learning module. But now let's discuss how archives differ from museums and libraries. This is for analytical purposes only. In fact, there are so many shared practices between archives, museums, libraries, and galleries that there is a branch of all of these professions that is working to see what we can do in common with one another. However, an archives has certain characteristics of which we should be aware. In an archives, the material is unique. It cannot be replaced. Usually an archives contains two-dimensional or digital materials. Access in an archives requires high levels of intervention by staff members. There is no self-service in an archives. Archives exist principally for research about the information contained in the records, usually in-depth information. Museums, there are many different kinds of museums, but consider a history or an archaeological or an art museum as the model for what I'm about to say here. In museums, material is unique and cannot be replaced. It also tends to have intrinsic and even monetary value that's sometimes very high. Usually museum items are three-dimensional artifacts. Access may not be available, or when it is, it may be extremely limited. Some museums exist for research in branches of material culture or art criticism, but many exist for aesthetic reasons. Libraries, which with you are very familiar, store materials that can be replaced more often than not. Books, in fact, are the materials stored in libraries. Access is very open. It's very much self-service. And you are highly encouraged by almost all librarians to check materials out for home use and to rummage around yourself. There are a wide variety of reasons for archives to exist. Research and pleasure are chief among those. Let's look back at archives and note that archival practice combines professional knowledge with craft application. The professional knowledge is the theory that undergirds all of our practice. It also leads to a view of the world that impacts the way archivists think about the interaction between people and information. Some of the theories about archival practices concern provenance, very important concept about arranging archival material by creator. A library arranges books by their subject so that different books by the same author might be found on different shelves in a library. However, in an archives, all of the research notes, drafts, correspondence, etc., concerning all of those books, regardless of their topic, are brought into the same collection under the author's name. Another theory in archivy is original order. This is the notion that an office filing system tells the researcher something about the way the creator understood their records and the information contained therein. There are similarities in theory between original order and provenance's dictum that you keep things in order of where they came from and who created them, rather than what you think they mean or what subject they pertain to. You don't break up original order in much the same way that you don't break up provenance. I know these are a little difficult to understand. When you have a little more practice with them, you'll understand them more thoroughly. Also, there's a great deal of archival theory about appraisal. Appraisal is the act of assigning value to archival materials in deciding whether to keep them or to discard them. By doing so, you are keeping a part of the corporate social memory, and you are defining what your archives is. Also, Appraisal requires you to decide how many resources to devote to preserving and making available any particular body of materials. Now, there are many craft practices that archivists do also. The craft practices are mechanisms for applying archival theories to actual collections of material. Craft practices also, as an archivist, help you to gain intellectual and physical control over any collection or over all of the collections that you manage. It helps you to manage them through the workflow of surveying, accessioning, processing, arranging and describing, making available, providing reference. These craft practices also make them available and accessible to a public that might not know what's in them. Now, we discuss many of these aspects of archivy in the remainder of this class, but for the moment, this lecture is at an end. And as always, thank you for your time.